Hello everyone, John from Gaming in the Wild here, and October is upon us. That means it's time for another month ahead game release video running through all the weird and wonderful releases we have to look forward to this month. And there are plenty of weird and wonderful experiences on offer, from playing Dracula's estate agent in 1990s Detroit, to bouncing through a colourful insect world as a rolling woodlouse, to playing as a walking lighthouse with a seagull for a friend. So open up your wish list as we start off with all of the exciting October indie releases, then we'll run through some of the big AA and AAA games that are coming out this month, and hang around at the end for a bonus section where I'll review some of the games that I've been playing recently. As always, please drop a like on the video if you enjoy it. It helps more people to find the channel. You can always sub to the channel if you'd like more videos like this in your feed. You can hop into the channel's Patreon for bonus stuff and a supporters Discord invite. More on that in a while. And with that, let's go. First up this month is Byte. This is a proper little indie weirdo by solo developer James Martini. It's a puzzle adventure mashup based on the Dracula mythology, and it's set in the United States during the 1990s at the dawn of internet technology. You play as Jonathan Harker, who is hired as a real estate agent by the Count. He's holed up in Detroit and he's planning a move into NYC. He's had a bunch of office tech installed for you to get some deals done, but he doesn't know how to use it, and so you, the player, are tasked with a bunch of setup, debugging, brute forcing, password guessing, and so forth. Things escalate out of control, as you might expect in a vampire story, and it seems like it might really go places. This is a really intriguing little game with a gritty, low-poly art style that I think really suits the subject matter. It will take you about 10 hours to complete, which is quite a nice length for a weekend. It's well timed for Halloween. It's coming out on Steam on October the 1st, and there's a demo there if you'd like to try before you buy. That's Byte. I know there are probably some of you out there who heard me say 10 hours in a weekend. I wish, but this one's only 1 hour long, so if you want a shorter game, this might be the one for you. I love a short game, and I love an obscure solo dev indie experiment, and Season 31 fits the bill for both of these. It's by solo developer Laurent Castel, aka Main Sequence Star, and it is definitively an obscure game. The trailer currently has 52 views on YouTube. One of those is me. I will put a link on the screen now if you'd like to go and add to that count. And it's a 1 hour game that the dev describes as a short narrative experience about loss, degrowth, and embracing change. That plays out as you playing a character who runs rally races out in the countryside for the nightly entertainment of people back in the metropolis. But things start to go wrong. There are problems with the races, the weather, the power, the drivers, and it quickly spills out of control. But because this is a 1 hour game, I don't want to spoil any more than that for you. I am super intrigued to find out what this game is doing and the story it's trying to tell. And if you are too, then check it out. That's Season 31, out on Steam on the 1st of the month. 1 week later, we get Battle Suit Aces. You may have heard me talk about this game before. I've been excited about it for a while. It's the latest game from Trinket Studios, the creators of the perennially underrated Battle Chef Brigade. And this one is a story-forward deck battling RPG in which you play as a space scavenger who discovers a mech suit on an alien moon and gets sucked into an interplanetary adventure as part of the Battle Suit Aces. This involves entertaining card-based combat where you play cards to deploy your mech's moves against the enemy. You can upgrade your mech to get extra cards, you can draft in fellow pilots for special moves, and then there's a social element to it where you can get to know the crew, work on your affinities, make choices about which factions you'd like to work with, and that kind of thing. And my inbox is always full of new indie card games to look at, and something that often surprises me is that the card art is often very dull. And I mean, if you're making a card game, surely making the cards themselves attractive and fun is close to the top of the list. Battlesuit Aces nails that with anime-style portraits of the pilots and their mechs. It looks right, it sounds right, and it plays well too. I tried the demo and I loved it. That's Battlesuit Aces, coming to Switch, Steam, and PlayStation on October 7th. And talk about games that grab your attention by virtue of the art. Dreams of Another is one such game. It's a third-person action exploration game with a singular particle-based art style. I'm not sure I've ever seen anything that looks quite like this, and in this game you play as a character in pajamas who is packing an assault rifle for some reason, and you blast your way through a series of dreamlike vignettes. But the twist here is that rather than firing bullets, your gun fires particles and makes the world around you cohere into shapes like phone boxes, fences, buildings, a carousel, and so forth. Now, I thought a game about a gun-wielding guy and his dreams might be a sad story about someone who's come home from war and is struggling to readjust to normal life. And that may well turn out to be the case, but this also seems to have a lighter tone than I expected. It has jokey, philosophical dialogue and a healthy dose of light-hearted surrealism. And if you happen to be one of those people who sprung for the PSVR 2 headset, then dust it off, because Dreams of Another is coming to PlayStation 5, PSVR 2 and PC on the 9th of the month. And that brings us to the game that I'm personally looking forward to most in October. It is Ball Pit from developer Kenny Sun and published by Devolver Digital. It is ostensibly a Vampire Survivors-like, in which you clear the screen of an ever-intensifying wave of enemies, collecting the gems they drop, and then getting regular power-ups to try and stay afloat and clear the screen fast enough to stay alive. That's already an addictive formula that we know works, but Ball Pit builds on it in various ways. Your base projectiles are actually balls that bounce off the sides of the well and off enemies, and that gives rise to new tactics. For example, if you clear a way up the right-hand side of the enemy column, you can bounce your balls behind the throng and start hollowing out the pack from the back, but they will still be marching towards you at the front as well. So it has some inbuilt strategy in a way that Vampire Survivors didn't really. It also has some synergies where you can cross the effects of different weapons with each other to make some spectacular screen-clearing hybrid weapons. There are some fun and challenging bosses that will test your build, and there are different characters that you can unlock for new twists on the formula. There's even a little village building minigame between runs. I played the demo of this one for the full 4 hours and I was dying to play more. It's coming to Steam, Xbox, PlayStation and Switch on October 15th, and then Switch 2 later in the year. That's Ball Pit. On the 21st, Isopod is hitting Steam, and I love it when video games let us see the world in a way that we normally can't. Isopod is an indie game that does just that, taking us down to an insect eye perspective on the world. And as a little invertebrate woodlouse, we will bounce, roll, and fight our way through a colourful natural environment. It looks like there's some fast-paced platforming here, some tiny wing-style momentum gaining, and some simple combat too. The trailer doesn't give much away beyond that, so I'll be curious to see if this game can offer a bit of depth to go with the fun-looking traversal gameplay. That's Isopod. The next day it's time for Dispatch, a really interesting looking choice-based adventure game that the developers describe as a superhero workplace comedy. This is a game with a really interesting story. You play as a washed-up superhero called Mecha Man, whose mech suit was destroyed. He then gets enlisted in a kind of call center job at a superhero agency under the promise that his suit can be reconstructed. But the interesting thing about this game is that it's by a new studio called Ad Hoc, made up of former Telltale staff. And apparently this project was originally planned to be live action, which I assume means a TV show, but it was cancelled during the pandemic and then repurposed into a game. That might explain why the voice cast has some such big stars in it, including Aaron Paul as Mecha Man and Jeffrey Wright, and it might also explain why there seem to be franchise hopes for this, with a tabletop version and an animated series in the works. That's a lot of money and hopes pinned onto this so far untested project, but the demo did get overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam earlier this year, so I guess they might be onto something. It does look slick as hell, and it's going to be released episodically over 4 weeks, I guess, in relation to the old TV show plans, and I'll be very curious to see if this one soars like Superman or falls to earth with a thud. Place your bets now. That's Dispatch, dropping on PS5 and Windows on the 22nd of October. The next day on the 23rd, we get the Lonesome Guild, made by Tiny Bull Studios and published by Don't Nod. It's a cute top-down action-adventure, and all of the trailers show a squad of little animal guys running around on screen, so I was pretty sure this must be a multiplayer game, and I was ready to ignore it, but it turns out it is single-player. It's a game in which you piece together your party, that is the eponymous Lonesome Guild of the title, and as well as assembling your party, you have to work on affinities between the members and as social sim sections, and then power them up for combat. You can apparently switch between the different party members seamlessly in gameplay, although to be honest, I always prefer playing as a single main protagonist myself, even in a game with a squad available. I tend to find it helps me get that sense of immersion that I'm after. That said, the characters do look very cute and varied here, so maybe there's something here. That's the Lonesome Guild, coming to PS5, Xbox and Steam on the 23rd of the month. 3 more games to go in the indie game section of the video. Also on the 23rd, we get Moonlighter 2, The Endless Vault. I was a big fan of the original Moonlighter. It was a great concept with dungeon diving by night and then opening your shop to sell the treasures and monster parts by day. It's a really fun idea that melds 2 genres, and Moonlighter did that to perfection, because while it is in essence a roguelike, the shopkeeping and adventure elements avoided many of the pitfalls of the genre. It even had a really decent story with a twist in the tale, so I firmly recommend the first Moonlighter if you haven't played it. it, the sequel, Moonlighter 2 The Endless Vault, bursts that pixel art game out into 3D. It keeps the first game's winning aesthetic and luminous color palette. The dungeons look really interesting and like a step up in design, and there is a lovingly 3D rendered version of your shop as well. The dungeon crawling action looks interesting, and this seems like a really good candidate for this kind of makeover, so I'm really excited about it. That said, it is entering early access on the 23rd of the month rather than coming out in its 1.0, so I think, as always, I will personally hold out to see the full thing, which I guess we'll see in 2026. But it will be up and playable soon if you want to dive into the early access. That's Moonlighter 2 The Endless Vault. Coming towards the end of the month, and it's Halloween time almost, which is a good time for the Seance of Blake Manor, a supernatural detective game where you arrive at Blake Manor 48 hours before a Halloween seance. You play an investigator who's arrived at Blake Manor in search of a missing woman. There are 24 suspects at the manor, and they include staff, guests, and residents who you will get to observe and interview. And I'm very impressed with the super nice line-drawn character art that gives all of the characters a lot of very necessary personality, I think. There are also puzzles that you'll have to solve within the manor itself, including locks with codes and symbols to untangle, secret passages and that kind of thing. You can also eavesdrop on private conversations, you can sort through people's private papers to try and discover their secrets, and hopefully get to the bottom of what happened. So I think this is an intriguing mystery game with some deduction involved that is probably for fans of games like Blueprints and the Golden Idol games, and that's not quite me, honestly, but I think it looks like a quality production, so I'm flagging it here for people who like mystery games. That's the Seance at Blake Manor, coming out on Steam on the 27th. And the month ends with a bang on the 31st when we get the much anticipated pixel art Game Boy style Zelda-like Mina The Hollower. I'm sure you've heard plenty about this one by now. It started life as a side project by Alex Faulkner, a developer at Yacht Club Games, the makers of Shovel Knight. Management saw the game and they took it on as a full project. It ran a Kickstarter which raised $1.4 million, and it's been in development ever since. Along the way, it was featured in various directs and it caught the attention of a huge swathe of gamerdom. I think it's clearly tapping into some nostalgia for the Game Boy era, but it's also weaving together gameplay and aesthetic elements from more modern games like Bloodborne and classics like Castlevania. The demo was also very well received, and it seems destined to be a big hit, this one. That's Mina The Hollower, finally coming out on all of the consoles, Switch and PC on October 31st, so enjoy it, people. And just before we get to the AA and AAA games that are coming out this month, I wanted to tell you about this channel's Patreon, but before you skip forward, please give me a minute. It's a really cool offering. You get an invite to our patron-only Discord server, which is a lovely little supporters community with lots of kind people hanging out. There are all kind of things to get involved with, like a game and read club with books and games that are influenced by each other, like brackets, where we pit game characters against each other and vote on them. There are channels for Wordle, there are channels for games of the moment, guess the game, there's a fantasy critic league. It is just a wonderful place to hang out, and if you've been on the gamer internet, you will know that we need more of those. You're welcome to join us. It's just $1 a month. You get 20 bonus podcast episodes as well, and a lot of content creation chat. The latest bonus episode was a developer interview with the makers of Echoes of the End, the AA adventure game that was made right here in Iceland. So please hop in, you can support me, you can get all of that bonus material, and you can come and join the community for just $1 a month. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild on the screen now. Thanks as always to my boss tier patrons, King Champ, Shy Guy, Keris, and Nate, and thanks to you if you want to join up. And now on with the AAA and AA games of the month. There's actually quite a lot going on this month. On the 2nd, we get Ghost of Yotei by Sucker Punch via Sony. It's another sweeping samurai open-world sequel with a new protagonist this time, and we're on mainland Japan in the northern wilds of Hokkaido. It's a classic samurai revenge quest, and it promises to build on the gameplay of the original. I played Ghost of Tsushima, but I found that it had a bit of Ubisoft stank on it, with a limited number of repeat activities to engage in. So even though it's one of the most beautiful open worlds that we've seen yet, it was a little bit dull for me, so I'm hoping that the sequel can pick things up a little bit. It's sitting on a Metacritic 87, so the signs are good, but there was one 8 out of 10 review from the Irish Independent that caught my eye. It said, like many polished big budget games made to a formula, Ghost of Yotei is missing just a little bit of soul. So I guess it's more of the same, but slightly better. Can Sucker Punch make it seem more than the sum of its parts though? Can it find that magic? We'll find out on October the 2nd. That's Ghost of Yotei. Also on the 2nd, Nintendo are releasing the Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 remastered pack. Anyone who wants to relive relive the magic of those two Mario classics can buy the bundle for an eye-watering $70 or pick up Galaxy 2 for $40. And it is nice to see these classic games getting a second life on the more popular Switch and Switch 2 hardware. On the 3rd of the month we get Digimon Time Stranger. I myself am a bit of a stranger to Digimon. I thought it was a Pokémon spin-off, so I'm glad I did my research because it's something else entirely. It's from Bandai Namco, and apparently Digimon was a spin-off from Tamagotchi, not Pokémon. It is, however, a Pokémon-like creature collector, not to confuse matters even further. Digimon are digital creatures that you can collect and train, and they can digivolve into larger forms for use in combat. Looks pretty cool. That's Digimon Time Stranger, coming to PS5, Xbox and PC on the 3rd of the month. On the 9th, we get a timely horror game for spooky season. It's Little Nightmares 3, the 3rd installment in the creepy Inside-like series where you control a vulnerable kid through a mega creepy gothic setting. These games have a really memorable style, I think, with long-armed monsters reaching out of the dark and bloodthirsty beings haunting your every step. And you can play it on anything. It's coming out on all the consoles and PC. That's Little Nightmares 3. On the 16th, it's time for Pokémon Legends Z-A, the latest in the long-running Pokémon series, this time set in an open zone city environment. It looks like the game continues the Pokémon series tendency for pretty mid graphics, but it also comes with a revamp of the classic Pokémon combat system, which I think is going to be interesting for fans. It's a hybrid action and turn-based type thing that some reviewers who've gone hands-on with the game have described as being a little bit more like Xenoblade, even if a simplified version of it. I quite enjoyed Pokémon Legends Arceus, but I did find it a little bit dry and oversimple, even though the world was very fresh and it had a kind of a childlike innocence about it. So I think I'll watch the reviews on that one. That's Pokémon Legends Z-A on the 16th. And one game that really does not suffer from a lack of visual identity is Keeper, my most hyped AA or AAA game of the month. It is the latest joint from Double Fine, and you control a giant walking lighthouse and its seagull friend. You have spider-like legs and you walk around a strange psychedelic world, shining your light on all kinds of things. It looks like there's some fun traversal puzzling, and it's a real visual spectacle, this one. So I'll be dusting off my almost totally unused Xbox console and diving into that one on the 17th. That's Keeper. And speaking of Xbox, they actually end the month really strong, because on the 21st we get Ninja Gaiden 4, which was co-developed by Team Ninja and Platinum Games, the cult heroes behind Nier Automata, Astral Chain and Bayonetta. That's a pretty promising mix for the gameplay in that one, so here's hoping for a stylish combat spectacle that's also, somewhat approachable like those other games. And then on the 29th of the month we get The Outer Worlds 2, the sci-fi sequel set in a hyper-capitalist spacefaring galaxy. I played the original Outer Wild, and I remember some okay-ish shooting, some semi-funny dialogue, some slightly unmemorable settings, I would say, and I immediately had a full inventory in that game, so I kind of bailed on it after a couple of hours. It's not one for me, but I do hope that it's good for all the Outer Worlds fans out there. That's coming out on Xbox and PC on the 29th of the month. So that was our October look ahead video, and now for those of you who don't know, there is also a Gaming in the Wild audio podcast that comes out every 1 to 2 weeks, and I talk about all the games that I'm playing, and I offer some news and reviews and that kind of thing. And I've been thinking lately that it's a shame that I'm making all of these hours of content that my YouTube viewers just aren't getting to see, so I'm going to give you a little taster of what the podcast is like back here at the end of the video. It's a kind of a chatty review section where I talk about some games I was playing, including Wonder Stars, Hades 2 and Death Stranding 2 on the beach, so I hope that you enjoy it. If you do, you can find the audio podcast on Apple Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and right here on YouTube, link on the screen now. It's everywhere except for Spotify, because boycott Spotify if you're not already. If you're dipping out here, then thanks for watching, and if you're not, then enjoy the rest of the show. So the reviews section of this podcast is going to be a bit of a roundup. I will finish things off with my final thoughts on Death Stranding 2 on the beach. I will talk about Hades 2, which I've got a fair few hours in, like a bit of an embarrassing amount of hours in, considering that it just came out 2 days ago. But I want to start off by talking about Wonder Stars. This is a very visually interesting, sort of tactical combat game mixed with a very light anime-style story game. It's developed by Paper Castle. It is published by Fellow Traveller. And the first thing that you notice about Wonder Stars is the visual style. If you've seen it, then you will know what it looks like already. It looks like a moving cartoon to a degree that I haven't quite seen anything pull off as well as this. It has a Dragon Ball style anime illustration with lots of big spiky hair, lots of very buff characters, but it also looks like a moving retro 1980s cartoon. There is like a texture on the colouring that sort of ripples and moves as the characters are moving on screen that makes it, I don't know, it felt nostalgic to me, like cartoons that I used to watch as a kid, like He-Man, Thundercats, Visionaries, all that kind of thing. But this game is a mixture of visual novel and turn-based combat game with very light roguelike-y element to it. Maybe that is more cosmetic than systemic. The visual novel stuff is an anime-style story, which is told in episodes like a serial show. The episodes take like maybe an hour to complete. Each episode has several maps that you move over. They have little dots that you can navigate to. Each dot will either give you combat or a pickup or a chat with an NPC or a story moment where you talk to your party members. Maybe you call your grandma, you get some lore, that kind of thing, or you encounter someone that you'll be fighting later as a boss. The story itself is pretty light. It's, as far as I've played, it's a little bit like Star Wars. You start off on a desert planet. You are, for plot reasons, become special and interesting and get sucked into a big intergalactic plot, Luke Skywalker style. And it is like Star Wars-y in that the first chapter is you crossing a desert to try and get off planet. So it's a very Tatooine-style Star Wars intro. And the visual novel-style stuff is fun, light, funny but not in a laugh-out-loud way, just lightly entertaining. But I think the other main draw of the game, outside of the visuals and the anime cartoon style of it, is the combat. It's like a build crafting game where you get words and you have to thread them together into sentences, which then manifest on screen as moves. And I really like this system, actually, this word-based combat. You get like 5 word slots per turn, and you get attack words that are like kick and punch. You get modifiers that are like sharp, hard, or special, or, extra, just like these little descriptors that you can use. And you also get elementals like fire, wind, ice, metal, water, etc. And they will apply status effects. So you can thread these words together, into things like big, sharp, fast, fire, punch. And you'd have to experiment to see how they manifest on screen. Big, in that case, would add damage. Sharp would add bleed, which stacks and is a status effect that, you know how bleed works probably. Fast will reduce the cooldown on all of the words so that you can use them again next turn. Otherwise, words do have a cooldown, so you really need to blow up your vocabulary a little so that you always have enough viable action words to use. Fire will add burn, and then punch is the attack type. So if you do a big, sharp, fast fire punch, you're going to apply fire, burn, bleed, you will punch, and you'll get extra damage as well. And you get more and more words as you move through the game. It's always a treat to get more words because it gives you a whole new chance to rethink how you're playing. It was really exciting to get claw or jab or drop kick or bloody. And when I got the word bloody, that means that you get times 2.5 damage if your opponent has bleed on them. So then we get towards the build crafting part of it, where first of all you have to use your sharp attacks, then use your bloody attacks, and try and stack and stack and stack and multiply your damage. And so there is like a meta puzzle to the combat that is really, really fun. It's not quite at that Claire Obscure level where you're building like a Rube Goldberg machine of status effects. Nowhere near as complex as that, but it's like a fresh, simple, enjoyable version of that. It does have a twist as well in that you're not supposed to knock out the people you're fighting with. It's a bit like Beastie Ball in that way, where combat is, it's more of a game than an actual bout of, to the death combat or anything. This manifests in gameplay as you having to keep an eye on your opponent's health and to use attacks that will not KO them, but take them to the point of surrender. In bosses, this plays out really interestingly as well, because if a boss has 50 health, it has certain ranges that you don't want to fall in. Like if you hit it with 23 attack points, then it's got 27 left, and it might be that 25 to 30 is a danger zone where it will unleash a big attack, so you want to avoid that. So you end up doing all of this Balatro-esque mental arithmetic to try and make sure that your attacks aren't going to push your enemy into a phase where it might heal, or where it might apply armor to itself, or where it might unleash its devastating special. So there's a little bit of tactical thought in there, and I'm not that deep into the game. I think I'm on chapter 4 at this point out of, I think 10. So I think that the combat is going to ramp up. I'm curious to see how complex it gets, because I'm really enjoying it so far. The story is light, the visuals are fun, the music is nice enough. It's not voiced, which I quite like, because it means that I can have a stream on the side. When I'm playing Hades 2, it's all voiced, so I feel like it needs my full attention if I want to pick up the story morsels that are coming my way. Wonder Stars is not like that, so it's a successful side-screen game and I'm really, really enjoying it. That's Wonder Stars. I'm playing it on my ROG Ally, and it works perfectly, works really well, mapped for controller, and it's on Switch and desktop PC as well. That's Wonder Stars. Next, I want to talk about Hades 2. Hades 2 is a huge event. You know, the original Hades was a smash hit. It went all the way to the Game Awards. I think it was in the Best Game category, and I think it won Best Indie. And it really permeated the mass consciousness. I think Supergiant's games have always been respected, but maybe not like mainstream mega hits. And Hades changed that. It really was a big smash hit. So I guess it's understandable in some ways, especially given the shaky period that games have been going through from the business end of things. And Supergiant, I think, has got 20 people working there or something. So maybe they thought it's time to secure the company and do a sequel that they know is going to be commercially successful. I don't know. I haven't seen them talk about this. I was thinking, why on earth did they do a sequel? Because, Supergiant is built their reputation on being stylish and creative and doing the unexpected. I think Transistor was pretty unexpected. Pyre certainly was. So it's really interesting that they made a sequel, but Hades 2 is here, and I think a lot of people were very excited for it. It is the roguelike sequel. I was a big fan of the first Hades. I got to the end of the main story, but then I ran out of steam ultimately, I think after 80 hours or something, so I really did get my money's worth. But I was chasing that Olympus ending where you give mead to all of the gods to get like an extra ending after the conclusion of their main Hades story. And I want to talk about that original Hades experience a little bit, because this is a very direct sequel. So I think my loves, the things that I liked about Hades are going to be valid for Hades 2 as well. It's a game that I admired for the craft of it. Gen Z's line-drawn artwork feels like Art Deco adjacent. It's really, really luscious. It's really ornate, and it has so much style. Like, I love her line work, especially on the characters. It's just so graceful, and you really get a feel for the characters. It's so stylish and so pleasurable to look at. Darren Korb's music is just as good. It has so much heart. It has elements of rock. It has elements of psych, classical, folk. And Darren Korb has a way of boiling all of this stuff up together into a really rich stew. You can always tell that music is Darren Korb. He really does have a voice. And his voice has become part of what makes Supergiant great. The same can be said for Greg Kasavin. He's the writer. His writing is sharp, it is funny, it is poetic. That he's got a real knack for writing characters that feel like they have their own viewpoint, I would say. Something that game writers often trip over on is making the characters different enough in their intonation and viewpoint on a situation. Sometimes you can tell that all of the characters' voices are coming from one pen, and I think Greg actually manages to punch out of that and to make the characters feel really, really interesting. Here in Hades 2, I think Nemesis is a great example of that. A character that just does not like your protagonist and has very pithy, throwaway, sometimes insulting, antagonistic dialogue that came as a bit of a surprise, tonally, in a really good way. It helps that all of the voice acting is great. There are some recurring voices that I'm recognizing from the first game, playing new roles here. And the whole thing is just very, very aesthetic, very tastefully wrought in that original Hades kind of way. The gameplay, like in the original Hades, is fast, responsive, addictive, it's smooth, it rewards aggressive play, and it raised the bar for roguelike progression. I think the reason that the original Hades was played for so many hours by so many people was the amount of builds on offer, the amount of ways that you can combine the different boons that you get from gods that will change your attacks in interesting ways and combine in interesting ways. There were so many weapons, there were so many builds, there was so much experimenting that you could do, and you were incentivized to play in different styles. And that really made the first Hades pop. I think the only big downside of the original Hades for me was its repetitive nature. And being repetitive is, part of what roguelikes are. But in Hades, it was very, very repetitive. There were 4 levels, there were 4 bosses, they always came in the same order. And so even though you had all these builds on offer, you were just doing the same thing again and again and again. And I think that was a big miss, actually. Some of my favorite roguelikes, like Rogue Legacy 2, found a really interesting way of changing that up by giving you completely different characters for a start with different weapons at the start of every run, but also having gateways that could skip you ahead So you could skip those first few levels that you'd done an awful lot of times, and there were lots and lots and lots of biomes. So it felt like the game developed rather than becoming stale. I would also say that Dead Cells had an interesting way of handling this, because the DLC levels came and then they became randomly spawning portals that would just take you to other areas. So if you're in that first area, you can end up somewhere else completely, rather than always fighting the first level boss and then always moving on to the second area where you will fight the second area boss, which does get a sort of a Groundhog Day feeling to it. So that was my only big ding on the original Hades, was that I wish that it shuffled the deck a little more. I will also say that I think that late game grind got a little bit too grindy. I think Hades was a game that didn't want to end, and I think it is okay for a game to end. I get that they were trying to leave a really long runway for players to just keep going and going and going. I ended up feeling a little bit burned out on it, which is a shame, because it would have been nice to just tie a bow on it, if you know what I mean, and then finish with satisfaction. It came 6th on my Games of the Year list, the original Hades, and it was a game that I respected for the craft that I've described more than I loved. But the sequel is an immediately noticeable upgrade. Visually, it is very dense and juicy. It has raised the stakes on an already beautiful game. It has a new take on the underworld. It has new biomes. And rather than the regal House of Hades, we are now in the Witches' Crossroads, home to Hecate, Queen of the Witches. There is a war happening in the scenario of the game between the Titans and the gods of Olympus. Kronos, the leader of the Titans, is trying to take down Olympus and has taken the House of Hades. We play a key figure in this conflict. Her name is Melanoi. She's a brother of Zagreus. She's a godly daughter of Hades and Persephone, brought up as a witch by Hecate, and now she is entering the fray, much to the surprise of the gods of Olympus, because she's been concealed from them thus far. She's a really fun character. She's an apprentice. She's still learning her craft under Hecate, who is her headmistress. She is charming. She is kind of fresh feeling. I love her illustrations. It's a very sensual illustration of Melanoi, and you get pictures of all of her different facial expressions and moods. Really, really good protagonist, I think. She's been charged with breaking the deadlock, and so the quest of the game is to work your way down rather than up to the surface, as you were with Zagreus, to find Kronos and take him out. I've only seen the first 2 biomes so far. I think I've played 6 hours or so. Each has its own enemies. Each has 1 boss. The second boss is actually 3 in 1. It's a 3 for the price of 1 boss. You have to fight them all at once. It's kind of tricky for me. I'm finding it very visually cluttered and hard to pass what is happening on the screen. In a similar way that I did with some Silksong battles, like the mob rooms where you have people fighting on your side, people you're fighting against, and there's just a lot happening. I think it's part of my own personal sort of sensory disorder that I have, where I struggle to filter out sounds or repetitive movements or strong smells and become easily overwhelmed by them just in life. I sometimes get overwhelmed by visually cluttered environments in games, especially in high-speed action. So that's been happening to me a little bit in Hades too. But it does have a God mode toggle. You can toggle on God mode. It's like an assist mode, basically, which means that every time you die, you get a little bit more damage resistant by 2%, I think. So the difficulty ramps down the more times that you play. So it's a really ingenious way of giving the roguelike power curve experience while ameliorating difficulties that the player might have. You know, I'm on the record as not being a hard games person, not being a huge action games person, but really wanting to play games that are action focused sometimes, because I want to experience their story, their world, their art, their music, their characters. So I really, really respect Supergiant for putting that toggle in. I'm going to be using it, and hopefully it will get me through the game to experience the story of Hecate and Melanoi and Kronos. This game has all the depth of Hades as well. You get a truckload of different currencies and resources. There is planting, there is fishing, there are tools to unlock, there are weapons to unlock. You get ashes that you can spend on tarot cards. You can only have a certain amount of tarot cards selected at one time. So that's like a fun little card game you're playing to create your pre-build build. You get bones that you can spend in various ways. You get affinities. You get mead, like in the first game, to charm characters and give them gifts. You get a checklist of tasks to achieve that give you more and more resources. You can then spend resources into the cauldron at the center of the crossroads to move the story forward, to make new characters appear out there in the game. So it has all of that Hades depth. You will be meeting creatures of myth and characters of note in the dungeons from Greek mythology. some of whom then come to visit you in the crossroads and some of whom move the story forward. So it's an immediately engrossing, deep game with tons of style and lots going on. I think my initial response to it as a player is that once again, it's a game that I'm going to admire a lot. It's a game that I'm going to enjoy a lot. Perhaps not a game that's going to steal my heart. And I've been thinking about why that might be. I think in its totality, Hades felt more to me like a craft object than an art object. And that's a strange distinction to make, but it felt like sleek, cool, stylish, and entertaining, but perhaps without a certain substance that I crave as a player. So it's amazing at what it does, but it's also limited by what it's doing in some fundamental way. And that's not to take Hades 2 down. You know, it's a polished gem. It will be in the Game of the Year conversation for sure. But I do think about Pyre, you know, Supergiant's Black Sheep, the only game that they haven't ported to everything. It's a very weird game with a lot of characters. The writing is different, and the gameplay is so different. It makes you have an adorable crew of absolute misfits and then assemble them into a weird wizard ball sports team. It has mechanics where you have to wish some of your characters farewell in a way that is really heartrending for the player, and it just hit a different way. I think Transistor was also a genuinely impactful story about love and loss in a really bold, original sci-fi setting that had a lot of depth to it. And Hades is very polished and accomplished, but creatively low-key if you stack it next to Supergiant's other games. I tend to think that the weirder Supergiant get, the better they are. I think Pyre is peak Supergiant weird, and I think that Hades is their version of normcore roguelike. So I'm really enjoying it. I'm really looking forward to playing the rest of Hades 2, but I'm looking forward more to whatever Supergiant make next. Until then, I will enjoy Hades 2 as a very polished, run-based, roguelike fun game, you know? I think once you kind of get into it a little bit, maybe it's the kind of game you play casually, you know, you just throw in a quick run now and then. So I'll be waiting patiently for Supergiant to make another big screen game that I really do settle down and give all of my attention to, and enjoying Hades 2 in the meantime. I'm going to round out the episode with a little bit of talk about Death Stranding 2 on the beach. I finally finished it. I have done one episode that talks about this game already. It's there in the backlog if you'd like to find it. And Death Stranding 2 was a real ride, man. It was a wonderful ride in some ways. That original traversal gameplay that made Death Stranding such a big hit, navigating difficult terrain to get from A to B as like a very engaging activity and a puzzle-solving activity all of its own, where you generate equipment like ladders or vehicles or anchors or climbing materials. You pack all of your stuff, you head out with your giant backpack, and then you have to creatively deploy your tools. You have to wander through hazard areas, you have to scale mountains, plan your route, and then execute it and improvise along the way to get across things that you didn't see coming. There's also infrastructure building roads, building monorails in this sequel. There are all of the deliveries that you have to do for people that each have sub-stories of their own as well. Loads of characters to get to know, and this feeling of rebuilding the world. There's meta progression where you unlock new tools as you build affinities with different characters. So if, for example, your play style is more about stealth, and there's one character who every time you level them up by doing deliveries for them, they give you more stealthy equipment, then you might want to max out that relationship. So there's lots of play styles, there's lots of variety, and I feel like everyone who plays Death Stranding 2 is going to have a really different experience. You know, I was talking to Brad Galloway, who played it, friend of the show, and Brad was all about the zip lines, whereas I basically treated this as a driving game. It was like Australian truck driving simulator in a Death Stranding world. I barely got out of my vehicle, even when that meant driving up almost vertical mountains with extra grip tires and low gravity equipment like jammed onto the side of my van to make it to a mountaintop. So really, really varied play styles. Lots of depth too. It has some pretty major side quests in a way that the first game didn't really. It was like quite linear. You could approach it different ways, but it had a main linear story. Here in Death Stranding 2, there are really serious major side quests, like getting to the heart of mysteries that characters in the game world ask you to solve, that involve multi-stage quests where you're delivering and exploring. Some really interesting set pieces too, like a giant tar lake with some really, really cool and kind of scary and really impressive, almost breathtaking set pieces that go down as you get to the secret of the lake. The combat has also been seriously refined. Fans of the latter-day Metal Gear Solid games have been over the moon with Death Stranding 2. They think it's Hideo Kojima having a return to form. The combat in the original game was simplistic, rudimentary. There was, of course, the BTs, which involved stealth, creeping around, trying not to get caught, holding your breath, that kind of thing. Here, it's more human enemies in encampments. There are still ghostly enemies, and there are still large-scale BT bosses that are really spectacular and really, really pumped up and elevated from the first game, actually. But there is also a lot of hitting bases to steal from their lockers, to retrieve objects for characters and that kind of thing. There are tons of weapons. All of them feel different. Machine gun with a lot of kickback, silenced guns, light artillery, grenade launchers, grenade pistols, heavy weaponry, tasers that you can use for stealth, all of that kind of thing. So a huge armory in this game. People compare it to Metal Gear Solid 5. So if you've played that, I have not, but if you've played it, then you'll know what I'm talking about. Melee combat has also been significantly improved. New weapons, new handling. And I really enjoyed the combat. I think when I first started playing this game, whenever a combat mission came up, I would kind of roll my eyes. But then after about 3 of them, I realized that it's manageable. I put the difficulty down to easy, which meant that I rarely died in combat, and that suits me fine, man. Not there for the challenge, just there for the world. So happy to glide through combat encounters, and the difficulty options made it really easy for me to do so in a way that was comfortable and enjoyable for me. So the world really does feel like a playground. It feels like a sandbox. There are loads of ways to play. I had a great time hauling materials from mines to try and rebuild infrastructure that I could then use to get around really quickly doing my deliveries. There is that social strand element too. And I think I was probably an MVP for a lot of people that enjoyed using roads because I rebuilt so many of them. I was always very happy to see someone else in my strand rebuilding sections of road as well. You do get that cumulative, asynchronous multiplayer kind of feeling that makes it feel like a social experience, like a connective experience in a really unique way that nothing else has quite done, for me at least. It also has some of the best action cutscenes that I think I've ever seen. It has some intensely silly and memorable musical numbers. It has, like a giant red samurai rising out of mud before you and then engaging in combat with all of these robot troopers. And you just sit back and watch it. It's like it's like, remember when they used to make those Final Fantasy high production value animated CG movies? It's like the promise of that in a game. So some really, really cool, intensely silly musical numbers, action sequences. And the silliness is an important part of this, I think. There are times when there are going to be people having guitar battles, firing lightning at each other. There is a sense of surrealism permeating the visuals. Sometimes it's straight up scary. You'll find yourself in alternate worlds doing really creepy stuff. Sometimes it is very silly. There's a raindrops keep falling on my head musical number that I think will stay with me forever. It was just a joy. I just set my controller down, absorbed it, smiled, captured the video. I was showing the video to people and saying, look at this, look how silly and wild this game is. I think it helps that the mocap and the performance capture maybe set a new high. It's a new bar. They use the Decima engine as pioneered and created by Guerrilla Games. I think Horizon Forbidden West was possibly previously the best looking game I'd ever seen. I think Death Stranding 2 now takes that crown, especially for the facial capture, which has nuanced micro expressions, small subtle emotions playing over people's faces. You can see their eyes having emotional reactions, their posture and body language. It really is just a new level. So it's very, very cinematic in that way. The only big downside for me is the writing. The story, frankly, is messy, to be kind. It is based around some very highfalutin Kojima concepts that don't make a lot of sense at a base level. I've never really been able to grok the basics of Death Stranding, like the corpses exploding like nuclear bombs. Why? I mean, you can find answers if you want to, but the answers won't make sense in a way that feels true. And so Kojima likes to over-explain his concepts, but they still don't make sense. It's like the more he explains them, the less you feel they are real, and you end up kind of losing your grip on this world. Individuals having beaches they go to when they die, or sometimes when they dream. I don't really understand that. Spirits with umbilical cords that you can cut, but that are apparently called catchers, and if they catch you, then they summon like a giant tar whale. It's I don't know, you're supposed to buy into these concepts, and I get that it's a video game, and I get that it's silly, and a lot of it is probably for the visual, but the game does seem to ask you to believe these things somehow in a way that I just couldn't get on board with. And there are some stupid plot twists, to be really blunt about it. There are times when I wanted to just turn off the game mid-cutscene because, Guillermo del Toro was blabbering at me about his and his car getting lost in the beach, in the tar currents on the way to the, whatever. The whole thing just goes off the rails in terms of writing. But then every time I got back on the road, all was forgiven. And as the game wore on, I started to slowly get more on board with this odd combination of material that Death Stranding 2 is. It is a collage in some ways, and it is sometimes self-serious and highfalutin. It is sometimes referential and goofy. It veers from like an 80s pulp action movie finale to a classic kung fu flick to an austere French art house sci-fi romance movie. Like, quickly. The gears change quickly, and you get this tonal whiplash that does start to feel intentional. So I think I started to get more of a handle on why people like Kojima because of this this high-budget mood board vibe. I would never in a million years say that it's coherent or good in a traditional sense, but I do think that its incoherency over time became an aesthetic. It started to feel more like a feature than a bug. And so by the end, I was really enjoying the game, and I really enjoyed the finale. It has a really, really cool action finale. And I think that's partially because I had let go of the wheel. I'd stopped caring about the story. I'd stopped trying to understand what was happening. I'd stopped trying to buy into the bullshit, and I decided to just stop parsing it, laugh at it, enjoy it. And when I figured that out, that the self-seriousness of the game was perhaps not quite as self-serious as I thought, I was suddenly able to enjoy it a lot more and to actually plug into the vibe, I think, better than before. And so that's what Death Stranding 2 became for me. It was a journey. It was a singularly rich, deep, open-world sandbox that is gorgeous to drive through. Memories of driving across mountaintops in snow with low oxygen, the sun coming up, and just thinking like, where am I? It was bracing and memorable. And that is mixed with the uneven, bizarre, existential sci-fi story with its cinematic cutscenes, sometimes go on for 5-10 minutes, But if you can get on board with the vibe of it, you will enjoy them. That mocap, that facial capture, the cast is something to see. It has scenes that I want to forget I ever saw. It has scenes that I will never forget, and it has scenes that are just undeniably sort of kick-ass entertaining. So I think in some ways Death Stranding 2 is kind of an unknowable thing, and in the end I ended up loving it for that. So that was my take on Death Stranding 2. And this is John from the future here. That was the Gaming in the Wild podcast. Well done if you made it all the way to the end here. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed having that podcast section on the end of the month ahead video, or if you didn't for that matter. And of course, if you made it all the way here, then maybe you could pop over to Patreon and drop me a tip for making this for you. Patreon.com/gaminginthewild for that. Thanks very much for watching, guys. See you on the next one.